GMOs, in the UK, you have a very rigorous approval process. You must document that a genetically modified trait is as safe as a comparable conventional product. Now, I believe this to be an application of what's called the precautionary principle. I'll talk a bit more about that later. And there must be testing for unforeseen changes in plant metabolism. So it's a fairly conservative approach. In the U.S., our Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act gives the FDA power to regulate, and the FDA says we'll do nothing unique for GM products. That approach has been done, the pro-actionary position, that is. Well, I'll say more about that later. Now, why is there a car in this slide? Well, some of you may have heard that U.S. automakers are in trouble. Has that news traveled? By the end of this month, the Chrysler Corporation must reach an agreement with its bondholders, who essentially own title to its factories, dealerships, because all of its means of production. They must reach a deal with the bondholders or go into an unstructured bankruptcy, which could be catastrophic for the company. What everyone at this point is hoping for, that either bankruptcy might be avoided, though it might not, but if it is necessary, it can be restructured so that Chrysler can continue to work and emerge very quickly and be a viable car maker once again. This is a problem, this is a conflict over interests, right? Basically, the fight between Chrysler and the government on one side and the bondholders on the other side is what percentage, well, how many pennies to the dollar will they get on their deal? And I think last I heard was the debate was somewhere between 22 and about 26 cents. Right? That they're down to that. That's a conversation. So the interests are clear. These are financial interests and many other kinds of interests. I mean, workers have interest in Chrysler remaining viable, particularly so they can have jobs. They have interest in the retirement plan remaining viable, so that they have a pension. So there are many interests at stake here, but everybody understands their interests and can negotiate around those interests. I want to say that this is one way to distinguish problems. There are problems of interests, conflicts of interest, and there are conflicts around identities. I want to quote here Kristen Luker, the sociologist, from her book, Abortion and the Politics of Motherhood. We're writing about the abortion debate in the U.S. following the Roe v. Wade decision, which permitted abortion in the U.S. On a national level. She wrote, "This round of the abortion debate is so passionate and hard-fought because it is a referendum on the pace and meaning of motherhood." Not the kind of conflict that one could easily negotiate around. So if you have a battle over interests, there are certain properties that battle will have. Trade-offs are permitted. We're commonly accustomed to trading off our interests. Compromise is possible. Sooner or later, Chrysler and the bondholders may agree on 24 cents to the dollar or 26 cents. Once that such compromise is forged, it can be broadly accepted, and here, crucial point is with no one feeling violated. They may wish they'd gotten more, but it isn't the sense that somehow this is an utter violation of my personhood or rights or meaning. In addition, public interest can be represented along with private and commercial interest. The idea of the commons was very influential in the debate over environmental policy. Commons being an area that no one owns privately, but is in fact shared by all. But if one misuses or exploits the commons unnecessarily, you get a collapse of a forest, you get a collapse of fishing stocks, and in many ways in which to think about the commons. Identities are different. Now, this is I apologize, this slide is too busy. Here one's talking about core beliefs about your place in the world and about what's possible for your flourishing and the flourishing of those you care about. If you compromise over a conflict focused around identities, the compromise is really not more than a tactical and temporary compromise. That is, I give in for now on that point, but I'm coming back to you tomorrow. I have to win. I can't prevail today, but I'm going to come back. These identities, conflict over identity, decides must either prevail or prevail, surrender, which people don't do, or evolve. Back in the time of Roe v. Wade, many of the people on the pro-life side were, in fact, members of families in which there was a kind of traditional division of labor, where a man went to work, a woman stayed home and raised a child. Economic changes in the U.S. have forced many of those families to restructure themselves, and now they're two-wage earner families. These days, there are fewer two-wage earner families just because there are fewer people with jobs, but they aspire to be two-wage earner families. If you're in the workplace, or if your spouse is in the workplace, you presumably care a lot more about wage equity and fairness than you did when you didn't have a woman in the family working. So one question I've had is, will that change? Will that cause some evolution in attitudes about women's rights and women's flourishing? I don't have an answer to that. It's a speculative thought I've had. Roe v. Wade saw something called the rise of the mothers. I didn't invent that term. That was a term that group applied to themselves. Before Roe v. Wade, most of the activists and advocates on behalf of the pro-life movement were men. It's not an absolutely universal generalization, but it was dominated by men. With Roe v. Wade came the rise of the group that called themselves the mothers, essentially women who had adopted the role of mothering as a primary structure for meaning for their lives, and who now, finding that deeply threatened by Roe v. Wade, became politically active. And so it changed the anti-abortion movement. It's very dramatic. Lucar's work showed that advocates of the different sides of the abortion debate also differed on their beliefs about what it meant to be a woman and what it meant to be a man, women's and men's nature, whether women's and men's flourishing were in fact very different. There's very much of an idea about separate paths for what it is to have a good life as a woman and a good life as a man, whereas pro-choice activists tended to see that path as a and very much the place of motherhood in women's lives was believed, or different views were held on that issue. It resulted in a kind of mutual unintelligibility, whereas people on either side of this divide found it very difficult even to understand how someone could have beliefs different, so different from their own beliefs. Now, in practice, the split between identities and interests, I think, is rarely pure. So, for example, differences in education, work experience, and qualifications. There were quite dramatic differences between activists on the two sides, the women activists on the two sides. But that doesn't tell us what shapes what. Is it that people fashion their identities according to the interests they bring to a circumstance? Do their interests, in fact, take shape and themselves fashion according to the identities that they develop? I just find that an interesting question. I don't know the answer. Probably some of both. Okay, now turning to synthetic biology and public policy. Though there are touted potential benefits, the list is much longer. This is just a very short selection. So, cheap and plentiful medicines. The reason for producing artemisinin through synthetic biology is that it can be done, in theory, much more cheaply than the current supply, which has to come from plant wormwood. It has to be harvested and processed. So in principle, any malarial drugs could be offered at a much lower price than they are currently. That's the idea. Likewise, chemicals and perhaps biofuels could be produced in a highly efficient and ecologically friendly manner. It could decrease our reliance on petrochemicals and fossil fuels, and have a much lessened environmental impact, both in the production of these fuels and in their processing. Most of those benefits are, at this point, hypothetical.